All right.
And actually, before we start, I have a suggestion. Can we just talking today? I know there's some disagreements. Can we assume good intent for everyone on this call today? I think all of us are trying to get to the right answers, even if we don't agree on what those are right now. I would love for us to feel that
Yeah.
way.
Oh, I think so.
Yeah. I
I,
think
I
that.
mean, this has been my attitude for decades is that I think we need to talk more to people. I come from a small town in the Midwest, and there's a lot of good people in this
Of
country.
course there are.
And the
Yeah.
reason why trans care was a lightning rod for division and contentiousness is the fact that people just don't know. They don't
I
know.
agree.
They don't understand the biology. They believe what they're told, maybe, or they are fearful of what they don't know.
Yeah. I think
So,
there's also a human story, but we'll get into that.
yeah, well, that was a perfect transition. We've never really done like kind of a live rolling start before, but I feel like Marcy, that was a really nice way to kick us off. So, thank you both
Hmm.
for being here.
Of
Um,
course.
it's this is a fraught time for everyone, and particularly for trans people. It's obviously a deeply difficult time, and I am excited to have you both here and be able to learn from both of you and have a really good faith conversation. So, with that, it would be helpful to build on what Marcy was saying and just get a little context for like why you're here, why the trans rights movement is important to you, why you care, and just create a little context for our listeners. So, I'll start. Brianna, you want to jump in?
I would love to. First of all, can I call you Marcy today, or do you
Absolutely.
prefer Dr. Bowers? So, Marcy, I want to start by telling you a story I remember from when you did my vaginoplasty, which was 18 years
Oh
ago.
my gosh.
And this, I think, really illustrates who you are as a person. And first of all, before I tell this story, 18 years, not a single problem, no stenosis, no anything. It functions perfectly, top of the line, no complaints
I
whatsoever.
love that.
Thank you so much. I've been married for 17 years now, and your surgery was not a small part of why that was able to happen. So thank you very
Fantastic.
much. I doubt you remember this because you've just had so many patients. But there was when you did my surgery, there was a trans girl in our unit, older, was clearly going to have trouble passing. And the nurses in Trinidad, I know you saw this firsthand, were not always kind
No,
to the patients as we were going through. I would actually sit there at night and listen to them mocking us through the door, which was really
that's
unsettling.
terrible. Yeah.
And I don't know if you remember this. There was a girl that really had a bad reaction after surgery and couldn't walk, and the nurses were ordered to help her.
Mm.
And she got up on her own and she fell and she broke two of her front teeth
Two of her
on
teeth.
the floor. Two of her front
Oh my
teeth,
gosh. I
smashed them
don't.
on the floor. And you came in the next day and you raised holy hell in a way I've never seen a doctor advocate for a patient before. It was like she Rambo came into that unit and was reading scripture about how patients were supposed to be treated and what you expected when you gave orders about helping someone who was having trouble. And I remember just being in awe because, first of all, you were the first trans woman I'd ever met with FFS, so you were beautiful. And I remember thinking like how on your game you were. It was truly inspiring. Like as I went through my career and had to learn how to lead things as a woman, I thought of that moment many
Wow.
times. So when you were put in charge of WPATH, you were like my ideal person. I was so psyched for it. I saw the integrity you had in that moment, and I assumed it would be carried over to WPATH. And, I want to say this with respect, but I do have extreme concerns about the SOC 8 and what I see as a very political direction that our healthcare is taken, which I don't think is backed up by the science. And that's, Alex, you asked why I'm here today. That's why I'm here today. Like, I really believe in you, but I also think we've gotten off path. So, does that make sense to you? Do you know where I'm coming from?
Sure. Although, if you look at WPATH as a scientific document, which WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, is like any other major medical organization. It can have legal personnel, psychologists, therapists. So it has a broader base of membership, but it is very much as scientific as the AMA or the APA or other major, the Endocrine Society, American Society of Plastic Surgery. It is science driven and driven by the best available evidence. If you look at the SOC 8 compared to the SOC 7, the SOC 7 was about 65 pages. The SOC 8 is 240 something pages. And the amount of research that is presented and referenced in that is staggering. So are there holes in the evidence or areas that are not yet completed? Sure, as there is in any field. But the intent and the integrity of the science is there. You can kick the rugs and find, again, little omissions anywhere you look in any organization. But I actually would argue that WPATH does it rather well. And its membership has also changed in that founded in 1979, it was largely considered a group of cisgender, mostly white Europeans, making these guidelines for the healthcare of trans persons. And over time, we now there's 43 countries represented, more than 4,500 members, and we're increasingly diverse with more trans people now in the organization, and even some in leadership, including myself, which is a bit staggering in that WPATH had never had, since 1979, never had a woman with trans history as its president.
You were the first.
I was the first.
And you served as president from 2022 to just
2024,
recently,
2 years.
A 2-year term. And it's not a full-time role.
No, it's not paid. None of the positions are paid.
Really? That's very surprising.
No.
Wow. Well, thank you for doing that. I do want to take issue because I don't share your appraisal that WPATH is informed by the science in multiple areas. I think this is largely what I think the problem is. I think, Marcy, I think people like you and I are a very old phenomenon, right? Boys that desperately want to be girls. Like you can go back 4,000 years and see us, right? Like we were on Roman times, we were there, right? I think what has happened is
back to the time of Jesus. I mean, eunuchs
100%.
There's references of eunuchs in the Bible, which are
well,
probably
we'll get into
trans
that.
persons.
We'll get into that. But I think the science, I think the original protocols were clearly based on people like you and I. And I think generally speaking, the SOC, particularly since the SOC 7, has radically expanded the mission in a way that there's frankly no science to justify. I want to give you 4 examples of things I don't think the science is there for. The first is the eunuchs chapter, which I'm sure we'll get into. The second is non-binary healthcare. We are taking literal teenagers who do not fit the criteria for gender dysphoria in the DSM-5, and we are giving them low dosage of testosterone, which is utterly, there's no study to show this works. There's no clinical protocol to even identify a non-binary person.
I think you can find, there's actually quite a bit of information out, and especially emerging information in a variety of countries,
let me finish my
some of which have been maligned as being against this sort of care, which, in fact, from knowing people on the ground in Sweden and the UK, there's some, I would disagree.
Brianna, why don't you list the other 2?
Yeah.
And
I've got them
we'll
down here, and then we'll kind of go through them, because
Yeah.
I want to take our time and make sure we have time to really go in depth into each of these claims. So list the other 2, and then we'll go through.
Well, so the third one would be female to male transsexuals, which there is not the same level of evidence for people like us for. The pathology is different, the risks of hormones are different, the surgery is different, the detransition rates are different. It seems very clear to me this is a different population and the treatments are largely conflated. And the fourth one is the spiciest, which is children, underage transitions for minors, something that I am in favor of in some form. But I think that, clearly there have been lawsuits, including the Tennessee lawsuit, that have felt that WPATH has not been straightforward about the science with minors
If I could just
and
interject
has, in
one thing,
fact,
though, that's
misled
very
people. Sure.
important in
Please.
any discussion of this
Sure.
sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's very
Please.
important not to inject anecdote as being a prescription for how medicine should be delivered. This is true in any
Sure.
field,
Yeah.
and that's especially true. So when you isolate and you pick out someone who so-called detransitions or retransitions back to their former gender, those cases are very isolated, and they're of course they've been run up the flagpole as being symbolic of the entire movement and indictment of the entire process of care. But if you look at the vast majority of individuals who have undergone treatment, including adolescents, their rates of satisfaction, psychosocial improvement, performance in school. I'm on the front line. I see patients. I see these families come in, and it's really quite dramatic. So again, the isolated case reports of dissatisfaction with care, those are isolated and should be set aside. And even some who have been championed as being detransitioners don't doubt the accuracy of the diagnoses, even, but that the fact that their own personal situation has changed in some way. But there's no question. I do want to agree with you that this is a very, very important age group, and what we did for implementing puberty blockers, for example, before the onset of puberty, a lot of that was, there were very limited studies, and this was mainly an extrapolate. Well, I shouldn't say mainly. There was some extrapolation from adult data that showed clear efficacy over decades, and with the presumption that if it could be instituted prior to the onset of puberty, that it made sense that it would be as efficacious. And in many studies, that actually is true. But long-term longitudinal studies of trans youth who receive blockers, we have not followed them yet into adulthood, primarily because a lot of them are just coming of age.
Right. So I heard you say two things there. You were talking about the detransitioners, which are in the FTM category, and then you started talking about puberty blockers. So I want to really I think every one of these things deserves to be drilled down into rather than us kind of wandering around. So just 1 second. I would like to start by talking about the detransition rates. So what I heard you say, and I just want to make sure I got this, is it's your view that we would probably agree that there is a political project to amplify these stories and to put cameras in their faces and to make people think it's a crisis. But at the same time, is it your contention that there is not a problem with the rates of female to male transsexuals, particularly children, detransitioning?
There's not appreciable differences between transmasculine and transfeminine detransition rates. No, I mean there was a large study, combined Canadian-U.S. study, Kinnan McKinnon. It is not yet published, I don't believe, but he was the author and presented that. And there were several hundred in each camp that were presented at the last WPATH meeting. And it was really staggering to see how this is a trans man who was looking in at detransition rates. And they were, there weren't many. Again, these numbers are usually about 1% of persons, but it was quite clear that that the factors that went into detransition decisions were complicated. Some of them were actually about 2/3 of them were actually external. So in other words, it was their acceptance in society, it was pressure from family, those sorts of things, difficulty getting employment. Those were the issues that really factored into why they decided to suspend their transition-related care.
His study, I just want to jump in, Marcy. His study puts it between 5 and 10%. McKinnon. So just that's obviously quite different than the 1%.
I don't have the details of the study, but one of the things that I have pointed out is that one of the reasons we may be seeing more detransition now, or change, it's even change in transition, so it's a change in their gender related goals, is that for too long we as providers provided our patients a very binary model. So it was very either or. It was, if you're not male, oh, then you must be female, and if you weren't female, then you must be male. And I think that strict adherence to a binary on the part of providers also put people they painted them into gender corners that maybe they might not otherwise have chosen. In fact, that if you look at those individual stories, many of them just felt that they weren't really as, they would, if you look at a gender as a spectrum from 1 to 10, rather than everybody being 1s or 10s, there were a lot of those patients that might have felt that they were more like a 4. So having, putting that through the mill of a binary system that wants to make you either male or female, and that's it, that number needs to be parsed out. And there's no question that WPATH and many of the persons active in the field are trying to tease that out, so that we are doing a better job of identifying who does this really work for, and make sure that we're really addressing the true needs of patients and not the needs of to put it bluntly, surgeons and and care providers.
Sure. But Marcy, if I could just interject here. So two things in response to what you just said. I have a different theory about FTMs, because I think like 10 years ago, I really just assumed they were like us, like girls that wanted to be boys from a very young age. And I think if you get out there and you really study the pathology, they're just not. They're not.
I don't
They
understand
don't.
this. You're making
Well,
such a
hold
distinction
on. I
like
let
this.
you talk.
It
I
doesn't.
let you talk.
It doesn't really fit with that. I mean, I want to hear you more. I
Sure.
want to hear why you think that.
Yeah, sure. So I think that the pathology is very, very different from them. I think it's understudied. I think that the vast majority of the studies that the original Benjamins were built on were on people like you and I. And I think that respectfully, like, look, I'm a Democrat. I vote Democrat. I worked my butt off for Kamala. But I think respectfully, WPATH is filled with people that have a very specific worldview on the left. And I think that with the best of intentions, we assume that, hold on, can I please finish? Yeah. Sure, thank you. I think with the best of intentions, we assume that the healthcare for female to males should be the exact same as male to females. And I don't think there's really strong evidence for that. Go look at the studies that y'all have. The evidence of every single part of female to male transition is less studied than we are. It's walking them down a certain path.
Let me present some evidence to just sort of get in here for 1 second. So
100%.
I mean, there is a lot of transmasculine membership. And by the way, they should be referred to as transmasculine. I would say that F to M and M to F is old terminology. So
please go ahead, Alex.
I just want to create context for this, because I think the context does matter. And the CAS review is very clear on this data. And this is from England. It's harder to get data in the US. But, there was from 2010 to 2021, I think it went from like 15 people in the national gender clinic in England to like 3,000. And the vast majority of those people were transmasculine. I think it was over 2/3, close to 70%.
I see where you're going.
So I think it's just relevant, just contextually, to know that again, I was just looking at a gender clinic in Oregon, had a 40x increase from 2013 to 21. And again, the majority are transmasculine. I
Right.
think that context really
Yeah.
matters. It also, the Cass review, and happy to dispute this, uses very specific language around the nature of when the onset of the dysphoria is. And they describe in transfeminine dysphoria, generally the onset is in an early age, and transmasculine dysphoria is generally in the teenage years. That is to me, a
Yeah.
difference. I don't know
These
what
are,
that means
this
for
is
the
all,
actual. Yeah,
this is all, I can't disagree with any of what you're saying.
okay.
And although I do take issue with the Cass report, which was
We
terribly
can get into that. Yeah, we have time.
politically motivated and really not a very credible piece of opinion. But it does point out, any of these things you can learn from them. There are certain things, and one of the things that has troubled me as well is the shift that we had from what was traditionally we thought of that it was more of we saw more trans feminine persons presenting for care, and that ratio has completely flipped. Where now 2/3 of individuals presenting to gender clinics now are assigned female at birth. And I've asked different providers, pediatric specialists, Diane Ehrensaft, a very well-known psychologist, and I'm not sure I really have a satisfactory answer yet, but there's no question that society has a problem with how girls are being, what their role models are, and how we are affirming them as emerging female beings on this planet. So, and I've heard, and of course I've heard anecdotes from the individuals themselves saying that, it wasn't so much that they wanted to be men, but they were jealous of the things that they felt men could have. And
Right.
that's not really an identity issue. That is the demographic shift is one that really needs to be looked at.
I agree.
What is the
Yeah.
body image for young girls and women as they enter puberty? I have 2 daughters myself. So
Yeah.
in my middle daughter, who's getting married this summer in Scotland,
No.
and has become
Mazel tov.
decidedly feminine, by the way. But she really didn't like puberty. When she got breasts and she had to put a shirt on, she was not happy about it. And you might even have considered her to be a bit of a tomboy. But so, and then the older daughter was ashamed of her breasts and used to walk in a way that kind of covered up her emerging breast tissue. So,
Yeah.
And that I was so surprised by that as someone who identified as female, that wouldn't be a proud feature of who they were. But this is the issue, and this is why in any of these standards, the process has to be slowed down.
I agree.
I'm not saying that it hasn't been. Again, you have to be struck by how overwhelming the rates of success are. If you look at breast augmentation in cisgender women, you look that up sometimes. Celebrity breast, how many regret that surgery? Knee surgery, which is very difficult to get through, has a 20% regret rate.
Yeah, I was really glad to be in the positive category on that.
So we want to be better about it. We want to get better about it, especially in young people that have their whole lives ahead. The worst thing we can do is prescribe a therapy that they're not going to be happy with.
Sure. So I would really appreciate like an equal chance to talk as we're doing this. That would feel fair to me. So I hear what you're saying on that. I feel like we're jumping around a bit. So I want to come back to something you touched on because I think this is a really big point of disagreement. But I also want to make sure we give FTMs their due, because I think this needs to be radically unpacked. So, Alex, do you have any preference about which way we go with this? Would you rather go down talking about the non-binary stuff she brought up, or stay on the FTMs for now?
I think here's what I would like to do, just to pull back for a second, because I think
Sure.
we just got out of the gate in the weeds, and people, you both are deeply ensconced in these conversations, and I think just to frame it up for
Hmm.
people, I think like for a second, and then we'll have time for both of those, and um, I think just in general when thinking about the conversation around gender affirming care, and
Right.
I think the conversation there's one around kids or generally teens and adults. So I think we should just focus around, in general, be focused on the teen conversation, because I think that
Yeah,
is the
because I think
conversation
that,
that
I never like to use that word science is settled, because that is not, science is never
Right.
settled. It's always evolving. But the,
Sure.
but for adults, the, that evidence is very strong that gender affirming
Yeah.
care, the real issue, and this is why we're running into so much trouble. We ran into it this last political cycle, is that, is that, uh, particularly conservative lawmakers and religious conservatives see gender as godly prescribed, assigned at birth in a perfect binary.
Sure.
And they take a third grade biology approach to humanity. And it's never been that way. There's 1 in
My
50
literal job
persons
is
are
stopping
considered
Republicans,
intersex.
but the political project has nothing to do with our healthcare. My literal job is to stop them. This is a healthcare discussion, and it is completely
It's so
exogenous here.
true.
We're talking about healthcare
so
between a doctor
yes
and a patient.
So
yes
true.
so when it comes to gender affirming care and sort of children and teenagers and adolescents, um, there is the context for this WPATH standards of care moving from 6 to 7 to 8, which is really what we're talking about, right? So I think for people at home, number one, WPATH is an organization that has immense um, influence over what is best medical practice around
It's
the
a global.
world. It is the sort of gold standard for best practice. There was a shift from 6 to 7 to a more affirmative model, and then there was a shift from 7 to 8 that did a number of things, and we will get into them. It got rid of age minimums. It got rid of what I think trans sort of advocates call gatekeeping,
Yep.
and replaced it within a model that is called informed consent. And I think that is what we really do need to get into and break down. There were other things like eunuch as a gender and saying puberty blockers were reversible. So there's a lot, but this SOC 8 is really what governs medical care in the 24 states where this is still allowed, right? Obviously, the broader context is that the political situation when it comes to this care is deeply fraught in ways we can talk about. So I do just want to get at this concept of informed consent, because I think it is the most important concept and underlies all of the other questions that we are getting into, right? And so
Sure.
SOC 8, its concept of informed consent is one of what? How, like, take a
Well,
stab at
let's go back a little
describing
bit.
that
I've been
for
a
us.
member of WPATH
I
since
have barely talked
2001.
in this, Marcy. I would
All right.
really love you to share with the mic a little
All
bit.
right, so Brianna, take informed
Thank you.
consent away, and then you can
So
create
in
context, Marcy.
So this is
2001,
one of my really biggest problems with SOC8. This has been a disaster. I think this affirmative care model has been disastrous for trans people. And I really, really want to walk through this, because this is my biggest problem with it. There are a lot of states today where you can walk in and you can just sign some forms and say, I acknowledge this, and get on testosterone literally that day. When I transition, hold on,
That's not
Marcy,
really. They're
Marcy,
not,
I really need you
following
to
the standards of
respect
care
me
then.
and
Sorry.
stop talking over me, please. When I transitioned 20 years ago, I went through every single one of the Benjamin standards that were written in 1998. It was not particularly difficult to go through. I went to a doctor. I had therapy for 3 months. I hit every single, it was the DSM-4 at the time. I hit every single criteria on there. Very easily got clearance for hormones. And even though I was in Oxford, Mississippi, I found an endocrinologist who was willing to work with the letter that my therapist gave me. I literally went over to the Mississippi endocrinology center and would like read textbooks to try to figure out the dosing because my doctor had no idea back then. Then from there, I left. And my next stop was actually your clinic. And you actually required, when I got vaginoplasty from you, you required the 2 letters from that 1998 standard, one of which was just a letter written by a therapist, and another was one that cost me $1,000 to get written, actually, that was by a psychiatrist that went very deeply into my entire case history. They presented it to your clinic. These are the standards that you followed when you did my vaginoplasty. Y'all looked at this. The nurses, I remember going over them. They approved them. I wrote a
And we
check
still
and I
write
ran in there,
letters.
and
We
I've
still
never
require
had
letters.
a second of regret for any of that. My problem is this removal of all these medical safeguards has put an avalanche of people
That's
into
not
this
true.
system
So
that
there's
I
still
think are
safeguards.
not served.
There are still
They are not
safeguards. So
served.
you just can't state
Alex, can I
misinformation.
please, Alex, I
Yeah, no, you need to be able to finish,
Okay,
Brianna.
I'm
Brianna
fine,
needs
but
to be
it's
able to
taken.
finish.
There's a
Yeah, yeah.
lot there, and I need to respond at some point.
So what I was saying is, I think the problem is today, you have a lot of people that are going and they're being rushed through this system. And I think you have healthcare providers that are undereducated on the dynamics of this, particularly with autism, particularly with comorbidities. And I think the classical cases like you and I think we are very clearly responding to the medication. I think the truth is, in 2025, this affirmative access model has allowed all kinds of people to go in and start HRT. We have non binary people. There's not even a way to define non binary people clinically. It's just top to bottom. It is fetishistic cross dressers, which were very explicitly cut out of the 1998 standards. We have them coming through. Healthcare providers are not educated on this, and they're moving down a medicalized pathway. And I think a really big problem why you're seeing this maladjusted behavior in the trans community is it's a population of people that are not served by our healthcare, Marcy. You and I really responded to this because we were the thing in the medical textbook. But when you lower these safeguards this severely, you have people that are being rushed through this and they're not adjusting like you and I are. They're not getting jobs. They're not integrating. They're not making it to the other side. Like anyone can look at the trans community today and see this.
Well, let's start with that last point.
Please.
Disinformation, misinformation that continues to be uttered about the trans community, the hatred, frankly, that's been fomented by not only politically but societally towards trans people as a result of fear and misinformation, some of which you're actually repeating in some of the things you had to say. It's true. There still are letters required. The standards of STEER are
Not
still
universally.
Yes, they are required for bottom surgery. Absolutely, they are required.
Okay, so but they're not
Including
required
by
for
a
hormones and
PhD.
puberty blockers.
They're not required
Yeah,
for
they're not.
hormones.
And for the vast
facial
majority
surgery.
of gender
For
affirming
facial
cases,
surgery,
Right.
no. But they aren't required for cisgender people of the same age, and that was the point. It was about fairness. This came from the trans community. These were directives that were insisted upon by members of the trans community who were sick of the gatekeeping. Now, not all of, very little of what they would have liked. They would have ideally liked a fully informed consent model for care, and that is not what we have. WPATH is like a cruise ship. It moves much too slowly for the likes of people. When we make a turn in direction, it's much too slow for the majority, for many of the people who on the left, let's say. We do so with evidence, and we do so with a lot of trepidation and thoughtfulness.
What
Now,
is the evidence, Marcy? I because you referred to earlier anecdotally, and
evidence
I'm yes, because I really did a lot of research, and I
evidence-based care is taking it's not just the science, but it's also scientific consensus. So when evidence was lacking, we did a process called the Delphi process. Now, again, I wish I would have had a chance to have. I didn't know this was a debate about the standards of care. So, pardon me, I'm just an author on one chapter, the surgery chapter. Each had a subsection and chapter leads, and then members of the scientific community who provided input into those chapters and reviewed the literature. And you can look at every chapter. Each chapter has, many of them have hundreds of references listed of the available science.
I did look at the studies in the standards of care, and we don't have to go super deep in
Well,
Brianna.
you
You
could
can
go.
weigh in here. I just I don't think a lot of medicine has weak evidence base. So I'm not saying
Yeah.
because there is a weak evidence base that we should not be having conversations about the most compassionate medical care for kids with dysphoria. I just, before we get to SOC8, because this is when I got really interested.
Well, I haven't even had a
WPATH
chance to answer the other 5 things at Brianna that I had issue with. So
okay, so we can
we're
put
going
a
on
pin
to a
in
new
it. I just
subject?
do want to make sure we get to the evidence base because you've
let's talk
referenced
about
it a
that.
number of times.
So evidence-based medicine, the level of evidence is this lofty goal of having a randomized, double-blinded, placebo-controlled process, which in areas that where the outcome is disastrous to not treat. Let's say diabetes. If you put everything through, diabetes has low level of evidence for the ability. Why? Because you would never put a diabetic through non-treatment. You would never put them through a randomized blinded control when you have a therapy, when you know insulin is beneficial. You would never take someone with cancer and put them through a placebo control. So this right away drops their level of evidence. And this is a large part of medicine is not guided by high levels of evidence. So when you have a population that is potentially suicidal, has major mental health issues, you don't put them through randomized double-blind control studies. However, you do take time. You slow things down. And the therapists that I know and that I work with, they put patients through time. This takes time.
Isn't that anecdotal,
this
though?
idea of these pop-up clinics. Now, some of that happened. The pandemic conspired in some of that patients weren't able to access care. We already know that access to gender-affirming care was abysmal, and that was well before we ever got into the political attacks that began in the 2020s. And we know that lack of access to care increases suicidality and stress on individuals. When you have to travel 300 miles to access gender-affirming care, it's very, very frustrating and very difficult. So people began to pop up their the advent of online medicine, pop-up clinics run by trans people, where basically it was almost vending machine-like availability. That was clearly wrong, and that is not laid out in the standards of care. That is not how care is meant to be delivered.
Marcy,
it is meant to have a complete psychosocial.
Please let me talk, girl. Please let me talk some.
Are you going to let me finish once?
We can put a clock up, girl.
Let me just finish one thought, Brianna, please. I didn't know I was going to be attacked. I'm sorry.
You're not being attacked. We're trying to talk policy. We're trying to talk policy.
I have to be honest. The WPATH standards of care and how they are delivered by the professionals that I work with, the first thing that is administered is a complete psychosocial evaluation. That whether you're an adolescent, whether you're an adult, that is first and foremost. No one is supposed to go in and walk out with a prescription for hormones. That is not how the standards of care were meant to be delivered.
But
Let me just talk
the
about
reality of
that.
how they're being delivered.
Sorry?
It's the reality in many places. You can go in.
Where?
Free Press
Show
had a
me.
fantastic. Sure. Barry Weiss had a fantastic article at Free Press about
I
how
don't
Planned
read Barry
Parenthood
Weiss, so I'm
is.
sorry. That's not a credible journalist.
She had a really, we're talking healthcare policy, not personal attacks. She had a really good article that was deeply researched about how Planned Parenthood has become one of the top providers of testosterone in the entire.
The right has hated Planned Parenthood.
Marcy,
forever.
Please, girl, please.
Well,
Keep
you have
going.
to let
How
me respond. If this is a
Planned
conversation,
Parenthood.
a conversation is free flowing. That means it goes back and forth.
Okay, well, I'll just talk over you when you keep monologuing.
We're doing all right.
Does
Hey,
that
we're
sound
doing
good?
okay. Brianna, finish your thought. We're
Thank you.
working through this. Thank you.
Yeah, we're trying to.
We're trying. Everyone's
There was a
here in
great
good faith.
article about how Planned Parenthood is one of the top providers of testosterone in the entire country. It's got plenty of anecdotes in there about affirmative access, how someone walks in, signs a form, walks out on testosterone. I don't have to tell you, Marcy, testosterone is not the same as estrogen. You can end up incontinent in your 20s because your bladder will not work anymore. So you're wearing adult diapers. You can have sepsis.
All right,
Your
now
uterus confused together. That's 100% true.
Okay,
Anyone can fact check this.
I'm sorry. That
100%.
That is disinformation.
The incontinence isn't true. You don't think people are incontinent if they go on
Absolutely
testosterone?
not. Unequivocally, no.
Okay.
So, all right, let's stay here for a
hold
second.
on. This is Alex.
I've
this
lived
is
with
not
two
fair
trans
because
men.
I don't
Believe
have
me,
any time to
incontinence
talk.
is not the issue.
It's fundamentally
All right.
not fair.
Hormones are
Brianna, you can
remarkably safe.
respond.
So let's not let this
I
devolve.
agree. Estrogen is great.
Let's not let this
But there are
devolve
different
into
risk
disinformation, or
factors.
I'm
They're
just not going to be
different.
able to
It's not
continue.
disinformation. There are different risk factors for estrogen versus testosterone. That's just true. There's a lot of differences. You don't get the euphoria if you go on testosterone and
The what?
estrogen rather, as opposed to testosterone. That gives you this high, which is why it's a controlled substance.
Oh, come on.
There are fundamental differences between them.
So let's just finish with informed consent.
Yeah, you
for one
need
second.
to
Brianna,
stick to a medically accepted argument, though, please.
We'll start with Brianna here. How do you think about the concept of informed consent when we're referring to teenagers and younger children?
For everyone. Yeah. I really benefited from going through the standards of care. 100% I did. Marcy, I was actually at the edge of homelessness when you did my vaginoplasty. I was immediately disowned the second I came out. It was the worst time in my life economically was when I was in Colorado. I was literally working at GameStop, saving up enough to do your surgery. And the standards of care, the fact that when I was doing all my letters, it really gave me time to prepare and to have a plan in place in case my parents disowned me, because they did. It let me really think through the consequences of that action. It allowed me to work with my university. I was actually the first student at the University of Mississippi to transition, which I'm very proud of. So I've heard this argument over and over again from the trans community that the standards of care are this oppression. And I truly have never been able to understand why. I transitioned in Mississippi, and I had no issues whatsoever. And it's the DSM standards were much higher in the DSM-4 as opposed to the DSM-5. You've got to have 2 of those 6 criterias. And you're telling me someone can't go talk to a therapist for 3 months before changing their endocrine system forever? 2 out of 6. It's just insane to me. So I think we are not serving people by not giving them a pathway to go down. And just one more thing. Something I've noticed is the trans community is so radically different today than 20 years ago. And I think one of the problems is that the standards of care, go read the ones from 1998. They're really smart in the sense that every step socializes you into the next one. It's I had gender dysphoria. I wanted to do this, so I went to a therapist. I did that. It opened up a door. I wanted to get hormones. Went talked to a doctor. It opened up a door. Then I had to go hold a job for a year. I had to go out in the real world. I couldn't just sit at home on the computer. It opened up a door. It forced me to go learn some stuff about how to interact with the world as a woman, which I'm going to tell you, this is hard to learn. And, then I went and got vaginoplasty. Every step led into the next one and gave me a way to become an integrated, normal, productive member of society that could hold a job. And I don't see this today. And I really think that the destruction of these medical safeguards are really not serving trans
First of
people.
all,
I
you're
think
going
it's
to
why
have to
a lot of the maladaptive behavior
saying
comes
destruction
from.
medical safeguards, because there
They've
are still
absolutely been
letters
destroyed,
required.
Marcy.
The thing that has been eliminated is this idea of living in a we used to call it a real life experience
Yeah.
or a desired gender role.
Yes.
I still recommend that for my patients.
You should.
Every patient, that's one of the questions we ask. And I'm frankly alarmed if they have. Fortunately, we have a long wait list. So patients are in general required to have some sort of employment. And they generally do when they come as far as surgery. They are, for the most part, employed, fortunately, these days. Moving as the, what would we say, the left wing of the trans community would have is towards an informed consent model. I think, I mean, I'm going to sort through all the disinformation you said and pick out what I can agree with.
It's not disinformation, Marcy. It's not.
It's disinformation, but it's flat out disinformation.
You've put all kinds of bullshit up.
Can you just let me speak?
No, it's like you cut me off. You're just completely lying at the beginning of this about the high standards and the standards of care. So if you want to talk disinformation, we can do this.
Brianna.
Let's finish, Marcy. Finish your response.
There are still letters that are required.
There are letters that are required. You're changing the subject. They've been eliminated for facial feminization surgery
it is not
and
wholesale
and it's been completely removed for HRT. That's what we're talking about. So stop bullshitting everyone.
You're yelling.
All right.
I'm yelling because you're being dishonest.
Let me just ask a question to both of you, because
my expertise is in surgery. It's not in hormones. It's not. But
how does a patient, let's say a 14-year-old, how do they give informed consent? That is a question that comes up in the critiques of SOC8 all the time. It's like, how does a child who is
they are not emancipated adults. So in other words, they are not themselves able to give informed consent. They have to have a parent, at least preferably two parents, but at least one parent, and they must sign for that individual.
Do the children, do you think, have a sense of what the complications could be down? Because
this is important what you're getting at.
Yeah, you've talked about this and sort of offered some warnings. So I think it's worth putting those out there.
Yeah, that's a very important point. And how do we say to an 11 or 12-year-old, how do you present the future in a way that can account for what they may face in the future, whether it's the effects of hormones, life in the future, getting jobs, surgery complications that are sometimes years in the future. How do you afford that? This has to be very, very thoughtfully delivered and very honestly delivered when that process is initiated. But the question is, and this is where people have come into doubt, is that how can someone have agency over their own gender identity at that age when adolescents change their mind about all sorts of things in their lives? And all I can say, and this is the essence of what it's about, is how do you prove this? But all you can say is that gender identity is different, and that gender identity is established by the age of 4, 5, 6 years old in most cases. But what I do find troubling is that more and more adolescents are presenting not with a history all the way back to childhood, but coming de novo in their teen years. And this gets back at that cohort. How many, and again, Brie, you raised the issue of trans masculine persons. Suddenly assigned female at birth now identifying or saying they identify as male. How do you rationalize that dramatic increase? And then how do you sort out who is a candidate that really fits the criteria and who doesn't?
I fully agree. I think so,
But that
Marcy,
isn't a
this is where
failure
I
of
suspect
WPATH. That
this
is a
is where I
demographic.
suspect we're gonna
Can
have
you
a lot of
can you
agreement.
just let me finish this?
Well, sure, I was gonna agree with you, but please proceed.
How do you analyze that demographic, that changing demographic, and how do you put it through the filter of best practices?
Sure. So I hear what you're saying, and this is where I really feel like WPATH is jeopardizing those children.
Okay, stop attacking WPATH, because WPATH is on the side of trans persons. We're not recruiting people. We're not a machine. Stop
Marcy,
attacking
let me
WPATH.
finish my point, please. I will attack WPATH today, and you can
Well,
stay
then
on
I
the
think we
call
have
and
the
hear
end
what
of
I
our
have to say.
conversation.
Well, let's make the argument, the substantive argument that underlies
Alex,
it.
you have to let me finish, man.
Okay.
Come on.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
is
do
not
your
fair.
thing.
This is absolutely not fair. God, I can't remember what I'm saying because it keeps going off course. So this is the problem. I think that when we started doing the Dutch protocol, Marcy, I think you and I've actually never read your story of what it was like for you as a child. I have the typical horror story for someone like new at 5, 6, deep dysphoria, depression, like suicidal ideation, poor development, all that stuff. Like I had the case as bad as you can have. So it's not like my empathy doesn't really pour out for these kids. And I know kids. I have kids that are very close to my life that have gotten this treatment, and I've seen them go from broken to like lovely young girls that do not have the damage that I had. And it's honestly inspirational. What my problem is I think WPATH has had a role in, frankly, misleading the public about what we knew about the science, as is evidenced by this Tennessee case, and has not been straight with parents or the public about what we know. And I think the removal of the age restrictions, which there was a lawsuit about, I don't have to tell you
The
this.
age restrictions were it was
This
actually
role,
We'll come back to age restrictions.
the role that WPATH played in not being straight with people, not being straight with parents about what we knew about the risks for these different cohorts, particularly female to males and non-binary people, I think has jeopardized everyone's health care. Because it's very clear if you look at this entire cohort, they're not transitioning and acclimating particularly well. So I think, particularly with children, it is so critical that we are straightforward with parents about what we know and don't know, which is why this Tennessee, what came out in the discovery there about the lack of evidence at WPATH for these policy changes and your role in it was so disturbing.
WPATH the standards of care went from about 65 pages at version 7 to over 240 pages in the latest. And that was massive increase in the amount of literature and science that was referenced. It was an unprecedented document. WPATH has been about as clear as it can. It is accessible online to anyone without any password. Any member of the public can go and access the standards of care anytime they'd like to. WPATH has more than 45 countries represented. Anyone with any sort of professional degree is welcome to join. I don't know how much more transparency we can offer. We have been, it's a pretty stand-up organization. 3 major medical organizations: the AMA, the APE, the American Medical Association, the American Psychiatric Association, and the American Academy of Pediatrics, all endorse gender-affirming care in much the same way that WPATH does, as does the Endocrine Society. And some of these are international organizations or stand-up American with tens of thousands of members. And they're looking at the same evidence that you're apparently not looking at. And
the
they
evidence, the way
continue to
WPATH
conclude
works is
that
the Delphi
gender-affirming care has
approach,
benefit.
which is bringing these
Now,
people
you're
in
going
to...
to go down the path.
There's not studies you're pointing to. There's
Hold
not
on.
studies. It's the Delphi approach. Let's just be straight about that.
The Delphi approach was employed where sufficient evidence wasn't there, and then it was a matter of getting professional consensus.
What is the Delphi approach? I missed this. Brianna, what is
Delphi
the
process
Delphi?
is, again, where
I try to let Brianna get in there, but
No, that's okay.
all right.
Let Marcy talk all she
No.
wants. She's doing my job for me. It's
finish
great.
You've
What
said
is the Delphi
2/3 of what we
approach?
had to say on this conversation, so
It's
a little hard to
okay.
tolerate because I'm still back on my list of things that I want to answer earlier in the talking about the disinformation and
we'll put a pin in
scaring
this
people
after
about
the
testosterone and fetishistic cross-dressers getting care. I mean,
We'll-
I'm still
we can
stunned
come
by
back
that,
to it, but-
Brianna, that you could actually, you're just trying to
I don't
hurt
think
care
it serves.
and
You
scare
can go
people from
back
getting
to
care.
you can go back to the standards from the
just absurd.
60s. It will
Marcy,
show that
can
they
you
are
just
not
define the
served
Delphi
by
approach?
this.
Because I just don't know what it is.
The
so I
Delphi
can't
approach.
track
Now, again,
this.
I was not a chapter lead. I was merely an author in the surgery subsection. But the Delphi process is a consensus-based model where professionals in the field, it's part of getting evidence-based medicine. It isn't just the science. It isn't just research that's published. So where there isn't published research to support an opinion, members, professionals working in that field are asked the question, and a significant majority are required to vote in favor of that recommendation in order for it to be printed.
Brianna, what do you think of the evidence base that supports SOC8? So Marcy, you talked about 200 pages. Like, have you evaluated that, and what do you think of it?
Well, I think the reason it's so expanded is because they've introduced all this new stuff into it, all these new categories. There's chapters in there. It's not as long as I would like on non-binary people, but you've got the whole famous eunuch chapter. Congrats on that.
What's wrong with that? The reason it was included, I didn't have anything to do with adding that, but let me talk about the history of eunuchs, can we?
Let her finish on evidence, but I am intrigued by eunuchs. I am incredibly intrigued by the history of eunuchs, so we will not forget that. I want to get there.
So this is my problem, Alex, with the Delphi approach. Let me give you a really quick story of what I think the problem with this entire, when we say research and care, what it is. So when the DSM-5 came out, I was really, really surprised that we changed the standards from female to males and males to females to include all this non-binary stuff. And I was like, gosh, they must have done some study to justify this, to find out, to like medically justify non-binary people and show that this care helps them. And what actually happened is they sat around, these experts, and they said, well, it's just really hard for therapists to put people in these categories. So we don't really know that this is a thing. We don't really know that this helps them, but we'll just let the people do it.
Where do you come up with this? You're not a member of
memo.
WPATH, are you?
I'll 100% show it to you. I'll 100% show it to you, Marcy. I'm going to finish my point.
Sorry, this is goofiness. This is
the standard.
If you can't be sensible,
Marcy,
you need to be sensible, or I'm not going to stay here and listen.
I looked into it, so
Thank
let
you.
let Brianna finish, and I will just try to summarize as best
There
I can.
is a memo you can see out there justifying this change. It was done. It was by everyone that wrote that chapter in there. This is the general problem.
Where would you get a memo?
Is we're not doing studies. The problem with the Delphi approach here is we're making all this policy and saying, well, we're the experts and we're just voting and we're saying this is best for people based on like what we have here.
It's based on clinical experience, which is important. Not everything is written in a scientific chapter.
The membership of WPATH is filled with a very specific cohort. So we're telling people that we have scientific evidence for all of this stuff, as in studies justifying certain courses of treatment, and it does not exist. These studies for trans people are garbage, Marcy. You know it's garbage, and if they weren't garbage, you would reference them.
The amount of insult, let's see, you called You called WPATH garbage.
I said the studies were garbage.
You
I said the
said I was
studies were
dishonest.
garbage.
What else
I
do you want
think
to
you're being
say?
dishonest today.
Okay.
The studies are what they are. They go into peer-reviewed journals
Do you really think trans healthcare studies are
where
good?
there
Do you
is
think they're
not
good?
peer-reviewed evidence in journals. The Delphi process is a process where clinicians, people with experience in the field, experience about people who are living their lives in possibly a non-binary way, since you brought that chapter up, and they're dictating to clinicians who have been thinking of things in a binary way. Maybe we need to expand our treatment protocols and be less rigid about how
So
they are defined.
So let's
This is
let me
important
summarize.
because
Hold on,
this was
Alex, I know you're trying to
identified by
please people.
detransitioners in the large Kinnan-McKinnon study. This
But
was
there's
the
no
single most
evidence to
important
say
point that
this
came out of
healthcare
that
helps
study.
them. I want to do those studies. If it helps them, we should do it.
They're studied. Look at
So Marcy,
Kinnan-McKinnon.
let me identify what the studies are in essence. I didn't read all 200 pages, but I went through the studies. Okay, so there is the Delphi approach, which is not peer-reviewed research. There were 3 peer-reviewed research studies referenced. Okay, and this is for SOC8.
Not the
One
whole
was the
in
Dutch,
the whole document. That's not true.
specifically in support of gender-affirming care, specific for gender-affirming care.
There's decades of research. There are
No, there's
longitudinal studies looking at. You're talking about prospective studies.
I'm talking about the ones that I
In other words, the
saw.
ones that are done before the care is delivered. Prospective studies are difficult to organize in this area of medicine. But go ahead.
There's the Dutch protocol, which is real research and has been complicated, but there's a reference to that. There is another one around hormones with 1 year of follow-up and saw modest support around.
You're talking. This is about treatment in adolescence, of course, right? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. For adolescents. Yeah. And then there was another protocol that didn't have results. What I'm trying to get at and understand just personally, and as you said, and you said this, it's difficult to do good peer-reviewed research into gender-affirming care for adolescents. In particular, I think to really do it well, you need to, follow on, you need to follow people for 15 to 20 years through their full
long-term studies.
fertility and understand like how do they feel about various side effects when they're 35. So it's very hard to do this research.
Yeah.
I think that having done a deep dive here, my understanding is that the actual peer-reviewed research that supports gender-affirming care is
for minors. Please say
for minors. Yes, for minors is not great. However, it's not.
But yet,
it's not great.
But there's decades of experience from adults that is
correct,
supportive.
which is different,
Okay,
which is and that's okay.
They
That
may
does
be
not
different
mean that we should
populations.
shut
I
it
mean,
down.
Brianna brought this out. This is an important point that she did bring out, is that this demographic, especially this changing demographic in adolescence, it's a concern.
Of course it is.
Yeah.
But I want to talk about a wider problem with these studies, Marcy, because let's really be honest here.
There's a limited number, but they still are in generally supportive.
This is my problem with these studies. And I urge people to just go look at any random chapter of SOC8, go look at the studies that they cite, go look at trans healthcare studies in general. You can actually sit down and read them because there's not that many of them. And this is my problem.
There's a lot of research, pages and pages after each chapter.
Marcy, they tend to conflate a whole bunch of different cohorts together. So they put all of us into this giant soup. So for instance, you mentioned knee surgery. It's a surgery I've had, meniscus repair surgery for running. One of the first things they did when they developed that surgery was they went through and really tightly defined their patient population, the kind of injury we had to justify that kind of surgery. It was really, really precise the way they do that. That's one of the first things they do when they develop that. For this particular surgery I had, very strictly defined patient protocol. If you go read these trans studies, they put all of us together like this giant soup and try to
That's
draw
not true.
conclusions with it.
That's not true.
It is absolutely true. Go read it in the cohort
Ah.
breakdown. They will put FTMs in there with MTFs, with non-binaries, with trans femmes, with trans masks, and they'll draw all these big conclusions. And one of the consequences of that in these studies is it makes it very hard for us to go down to any one of these cohorts and drill deeply and draw conclusions. The ends are also very small. These are underfunded studies. They're not of great quality. Do you think that's a problem?
Adult care has been shown to be beneficial.
Yes.
When protocols were put in place for adolescents, the presumption was that would only extend and probably benefit people because they would not have to overcome the obstacle of having puberty-related physical changes. In other words, if they could block puberty before it began, then when they went through their desired puberty, they would not have an Adam's apple development, let's say, or a voice drop for trans feminine persons, or breast development for trans masculine persons, meaning they would potentially avoid future surgeries and from that, potentially a higher quality of care based on
And less
what has been
dysphoria,
seen
right?
in the future. That is, if you can accurately identify people for whom treatment fits. And that's the key question. And can you also give them a proper informed consent that they can look
Yes.
forward to the lack of, let's say, well, the one thing that has bothered me consistently is that by giving gender affirming blockers, that precludes any chance for them to have fertility versus waiting a couple of years into puberty before choosing to block. And so you may be aware that I have a bit more of a conservative viewpoint on that matter as compared to my peers.
On
But I
blockers.
think there are people moving towards the opinion that I have, and that I'd like to see puberty blockers initiated later. In other words, slightly after the onset of puberty. I think that ultimately will be the responsible choice. But that's going to take prospective studies. That's going to be looking at people and deciding, how did they do with puberty blockers initiated at Tanner 2 versus Tanner 3 or 4. And how do those patients look? That's an
Those are
intelligent.
stages of puberty, just for the audience. That's the
Those are
stages of
stages
puberty.
of
Yeah.
puberty.
Okay.
And the Dutch protocol, remember, recommended puberty blockers beginning at age 14 and then cross-sex hormones later. So that was fully through puberty before those. And then it was the American Norman Spack and others who they said, well, why not avoid puberty changes altogether and start this at Tanner 2?
Mm-hmm.
And, rightfully, the criticism, could be there. Was there data to support that? No. But the presumption was that the benefits would extend to the earlier grouping if you could identify those persons properly. And Dr. Spack pointed out that it was the onset of puberty, those changes that aggravated dysphoria, that was a deciding factor in who could be, we don't like using the word truly transgender, but those for whom their trans feelings would persist.
So I think this is where I think we've got healthcare is not about politics, but I think the politics are really hard to avoid here right now. Marcy, I don't have to tell you that the United States is really turning away from access, like children's access to care, in a way that terrifies me. And I think you and I both understand what it was like to be that scared little child that desperately needed some help and to see your body changing into something that was very difficult to live with. this is really, really, really scary to me. And I understand, like, as I do my job, I cannot base like the policies I advocate on my personal story, but I also know like the consequence of that healthcare not being there. Like we did not have gender affirming clinics in Mississippi in 1980. So
And that
but
adds
at the same
greatly to
time,
stress.
of course, it really broke when you did my vaginoplasty in Colorado. I was a broken person, still trying to deal with the trauma. I've got my head on pretty good now, but it took me a long time to come back from that. So I understand there's a human cost here, but I really think there's got to be a reckoning with the fact that I don't think we've been. I think we've not messaged multiple things to parents
WPATH is
well.
not the enemy.
That's what I think it is, but we can talk about that.
What?
I think there are multiple things we
Who
have
is the
not
better
done.
advocate for
I
trans
think
people
there
than
are
WPATH?
not. I think there are not multiple things we are not doing well with parents. So I think first of all, I think that no one needed to tell me I wanted to be a girl when I was 5 years old. No one needed to tell me that 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's all I could think about ever. And I think that this political project with the best of intentions, to put this material into schools, to cause children to
No one's
deeply
putting it into
question
schools.
their gender and to suggest that they can mix and match their gender, I think that it is objectively confusing the kids. And I can tell you, as someone who works in Democratic politics, it is turning
That
not
doesn't happen.
right wing.
Have you been into
It is
into
not.
a, Have you been
It
into
is
an elementary
not.
school?
Marcy,
I have actually.
you can talk to Democratic moms. It's not just
my
conservatives across this country. They are really upset because they think that their children are being confused
Well,
in
fortunately, the
ways that
Department of
are
Education has
not
been dismantled, so I guess we
good
don't have to
for
worry
their
about that anymore.
development. And we have no long-term studies about what introducing these ideas into children when
They're
they're
not
very young does
introducing
to their
ideas.
development.
They're not interested. They're
The
introducing.
second part
they're
of this
introdu-
is we have not. The
Excuse
second
me.
part of this, which for the Tennessee case came out, is that with lowering the protocols for children and not being straight with parents about the science behind it, I think the WPATH has not been straightforward about it. We've not been really
WPATH
straightforward
hasn't
about
had
the
a role in that.
suicidality.
Please,
Is
they're
not
not
been
going into school
straightforward about the
systems.
suicidality.
They're not recruiting. They're We're
I'm
underserved.
talking about a different subject now,
once?
which is you're
You
changing.
go
You're
on
talking.
so
You're
long,
making an
Brianna.
argument.
It's really
I'm not
difficult
making.
to
It's
even
pretty even.
respond.
Marcy, it's
you don't
pretty
even get a
even.
chance.
Yeah.
You just
Marcy,
spew out
Marcy,
misinformation,
You're wrong. You're
and
wrong.
then you don't let
You're
anyone
wrong.
talk.
No.
It's not true. We'll run the counter when this
Let's-
goes out. You'll see you've talked much more.
Oh, okay.
So what I was saying is you're now doing something you've done multiple times here, which is you're taking something from a past subject and you're taking it to attack a current subject. We're talking two things here. I'm saying the political project, which I did not say was associated with WPATH, to bring gender ideology into schools is confusing children. It's creating enemies from parents.
Who's doing
And
this,
the polling,
Brianna? Let me hear what your
polling
sources for
is
your
very
conspiracy
strong
theories are.
evidence for the
Who's bringing
polling
these
is very-
ideas of gender confusion into schools?
Marcy,
Can you just answer that?
I'm going to finish my point, and you can sit there and listen to it and try to engage with it so we can have a discussion here. So that is one part of it. The second
Who's
part
bringing
is
this ideology? I want to know.
WPATH's lack of transparency with parents about every single part of this. We've overstated the case about how beneficial this is for children.
Ooh, you're not on You're not a member of WPATH.
If
we're
you don't
going
want to
to
address
actually
it, that's
lower.
fine.
Can
But
I
what
just
I said
finish?
is absolutely
The age
true.
restrictions. We're going to lower the minimum ages for certain procedures, and instead, we thought about it. There was a lot of input. We had an open forum where membership was allowed to put input into the final version of the standards of care. And ultimately, it was a bit at the 11th hour, but WPATH elected to drop back to a more conservative viewpoint, which was to remove the age restrictions and go back to the default position, which is the standards that we set in version 7. That's it. So it was version 8 basically is version 7 where it comes to the age restrictions. That's it. We didn't remove age restrictions. We didn't say that it could be done now at any age, but what we did is we said it goes back to the version 7 age restrictions, which means that it's care is delivered on an individualized basis based on decisions between parents, family, and the individual, the physicians and the individual.
So I just to make sure I understand that there was no age in 7, and then there was an 8, and then you got rid of it to be back the same as 7. That's basically
That's right.
what you're saying.
Generally, it
Okay,
was
yeah.
presumed to be the age of majority, which is 18 in this country for the most part, and that was the generally accepted age. But the lack of a specific, it didn't say it had to be 18 or older. It left it open because there were instances in harm reduction, especially for trans masculine persons who were potentially in vulnerable situations where their breasts could be a marker for transness and could put them, Boys Don't Cry, the trans boy that was killed, that movie, that kind of situation where the presence of breast material would be dangerous. And so in those cases, surgery could be instituted.
All right.
So
I don't have a
version 8
problem.
was going to drop that, and write it in. But what I was afraid of, this is just my own personal view, I was afraid that it was just going to put a very arbitrary, because it wasn't based on, you're right, in the sense it wasn't based on science. It was based on, this was where Delphi played in, but it was
That's right.
it was just putting an arbitrary age limit, let's say 16. And that would mean that all you had to do is get over that hurdle, and then everyone would feel entitled to surgery at that age. That bothered me. And I much preferred the assumption being the version 7 version, where it was generally 18 with individual exceptions, rather than an entitled age hurdle where you reached it and you could have surgery. I didn't like that. So what we settled on was more conservative. Okay.
Sure. I do not have a problem necessarily with leaving exact limits between a patient, a parent, and their doctor in these cases. I really don't. I understand that. I think your logic is sound. My point, which I would invite you to engage with, is that I think it makes the political sell much harder for parents in this country to believe in gender affirming care for minors, something polls are disastrous on right now. I truly don't think it could be saved. And the reason I'm here today is trying to make an environment where someone credible can make the case for this. And I think what has happened is there's been a lack of honesty with parents. And I think we've not been straight with the science.
That
and I
is
think the
so
stuff
not-
that came
that
out in the
that's
Tennessee
just not
lawsuit against you was disastrous, Marcy. It was
Tennessee,
absolutely disastrous.
I'm not aware of any lawsuit. I'm not in any lawsuit in Tennessee.
If you want to reference the arguments,
There's no lawsuit against me in Tennessee.
There was the amicus brief in the Tennessee case, which went through your emails and WPATH emails point by point by point, and had you getting your story straight behind the scenes in a way that does not, it does not give credibility to WPATH. It does not make parents feel like there's actual science.
The smoking
You're
gun.
handing our enemies. You're handing our enemies everything
what
they
we
need
call
to destroy our care, because you cannot be straightforward with parents, Marcy.
Personal.
You've got to be straightforward with them about what you know.
Burger. Nothing
You've
burger.
got to know, and you've got to be straight with them.
Let me use a very specific example, Brianna.
It's not funny. You've been lying to parents.
No one's
Marcy.
been lying.
No. You 100% have been lying.
If you want to use a specific example from the WPATH files, there were the quotes like, people from a Zoom call saying things like, "It's always good in theory that you talk about fertility preservation with a 14-year-old, but I know I'm talking to a blank wall." Like things like that, where, there's a bunch of doctors nodding about, they have.
Where does it say the doctors are nodding?
Oh, I watched. It's a Zoom call with 6 people, and I think at least 3 were nodding.
Well, that doesn't give good optics.
No, it wasn't great. And I think like when it comes,
fertility is important. I think I already mentioned that earlier in the
why
call. That's a big thing that I would
huge.
I would have been if I was a trans kid and somebody was going to block my puberty. and not talk about fertility, I'd be pretty upset.
Well, but it's not about talking. He said it's, he talks about fertility preservation,
Who is
but at
he?
14, but at 14 years old, it's like I'm talking to a blank
Who
wall.
is he?
I will find it out. It's in one of the videos from whatever
Okay.
the files were released.
WPATH
They
files.
also said things like they haven't even had biology in high school, or they can't talk about it in a serious way,
This
which
is
has
a
always
WPATH
bothered me.
member for sure.
Yeah,
that said
these
this?
are all WPATH members. Yes. So the point
Well,
is, this is
I would
complicated.
disagree with whoever said that, and
Yeah, it's these things are
But
complicated.
it hurts public trust when this stuff gets out there. You understand that, yes?
it's not a yes or no answer, Brianna, and I think you should know that.
Do you
But
not
I
think
think that
WPATH's
the
reputation is
how
destroyed?
care is delivered. This is the same thing about the informed consent. One
not
person
answering
can
it.
give a very good informed consent, and I'll be honest, I don't. It's very difficult to do that with the weight of giving enough balance to what the pros and cons really are. To give true informed consent, it has to be quite a masterful performance in that it has to be delivered with true integrity, and that's a high bar for many
That
people.
is a high bar. I mean, do you think that is a bar that can scale throughout every gender clinician and physician that is
They
consulting
do
on these?
such a good job, but again, this is why in the way the members that I know that practice, we talk about longevity, and it's a persistence. It's a process. It is not a rushed. It's not a vending machine type of process, nor should it ever be that way. It takes a lot of thought. Hormones are serious business. Surgery is
Totally.
a major step. And it's got to be we've got to be better at defining who is our best candidate. And the point is that it takes a great deal of thought and sincerity and passion to deal with these families in difficult times through a difficult period of their lives. And you don't rush that process. This is why puberty blockers did make a lot of sense, because it put puberty on pause. And it did so with an incredible amount of safety in a medication that's been used for 50 years in the same age population without side effects or complications. And in that sense is completely reversible should the process go awry, or should the feelings change.
I don't deal with the clinic. I deal with the political aftermath of what you choose to do. I have gone down to DC 5 times at this point trying to come up with a strategy to counter these Trump EOs to destroy our healthcare, to destroy the dollars allocated for our research. I'm cleaning up this mess. So you may not want to answer it when I say, do you understand that the decisions WPATH is working is creating a political problem that is letting Republicans destroy our healthcare, but it's a real problem.
I don't
and
agree.
we don't
I think
have a
we've
plan,
done things with
Marcy.
an incredible amount of integrity. So I
You're
disagree.
failing.
I'd say no.
You're failing.
Incredible
let's talk about the
integrity.
future. Let's talk about
Oh,
Brianna.
that's so not true.
Okay, then we
Brianna,
disagree.
Let's talk about the future. That's the whole point of the podcast. And thank you both for hanging in there. Let's talk about the future. What is, Brianna, you're two of the most important trans activists in the country and world right now. What is the future, Brianna, when you look at the trans rights movement? What is an affirmative vision that you want to put out? And then, Marcy, I'll ask you the same thing.
So I think that the fundamental problem with WPATH is an activist
WPATH is not the
organization.
enemy. Stop.
Yeah.
I'm going to finish what I'm saying. Please act like an adult. It's not funny. Your behavior here is
No. Come on. Everyone's doing their best. Keep going.
So my fundamental problem is I think WPATH, the thing that gave me the pathway to have a successful life, a good marriage, a good job, all that stuff. WPATH, used to be the Benjamins when I did it, has been ideologically captured. And is putting out policy proposals that there's no scientific evidence for. including the non-binary stuff, including the eunuch stuff, including like the children, which there's not the evidence that we've made the case for. I think we have activists that are out there talking to policymakers and saying, we got the evidence for this. It's dead. We're dead sure about it. And then I think there's a parallel right-wing project led by GenSpec, the awful people at GenSpec and SEGM, and, Manhattan Institute to a lesser extent, but primarily them, to go through and fact check all of this and create a political shitstorm about every part of it, because they're looking into your claims and they don't check out. So this relates to what I'm saying, Alex. The future of trans healthcare has got to be, we need some organization that's advocating for transsexuals that really cares about
Okay,
the
they're crowd
science,
trans
that
people.
really cares about the
Transsexual's an
things
old
that
term.
we say being true, and making that case to the public with integrity and without this clown show that's been going on. At the same time, we need a new generation of activists out there that are willing to not message this as a fringe leftist issue. It is a problem that almost every single political trans person out there is on the fringe left, and most of them are communist. Something I talk a lot about is Israel policy. And one of the smart things that Jews have done here in the United States is they've made their civil rights as best as they can a nonpartisan issue. It's not left versus right. They'll talk to the right wing when they can. They'll talk to the left wing when they can. I want to do that with trans healthcare. This needs to be non-ideological, nonpartisan, talking to Republicans with respect and like they are adults. So I think the future of trans healthcare has got to be getting back to basics, getting away from these fringe politics, and stopping lying to people about what we know, because we don't know a lot
that's
about
a
trans
long
healthcare.
statement. Can I?
That was Marcy. Now, yes,
Can I pick
you
up on
can
that?
both
Well,
respond and but also state your affirmative vision
Yeah,
for where
right.
you think we should be going.
So, you don't, as we used to say, you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. WPATH was established in 1979 specifically because there were clinicians operating without any sort of standards or guidelines. So it was convened as an evidence base, which means science and clinical experience. It's represented by clinicians and scientists from around the world. These are not just fringe people. These are not extremists and activists. These are, for the most part, clinicians. There are Republicans and there are Democrats. I do agree with Brianna that we need, going forward, the clarity and the ability to talk on to everyone is important. There are very reasoned, thoughtful, well-minded people throughout the ideological middle.
Can I jump in here, Alex?
No,
Please
wait.
go ahead.
I'm just getting to my vision here. So my vision is that we see further coalescence of the major medical groups, which have rallied around WPATH, because they're looking at the same science you are, and they come up with a different conclusion. Politically based reports like the Cass report notwithstanding, Sweden, which has been often cited as a country where they've restricted trans care, what they've really done is they've just simply funded science where every person who is treated in adolescence is now part of research. And when that research emerges, how are you going to react? Because it's probably going to be affirming that trans care saves lives, betters lives, and serves a small part of the population that is no threat to social order.
So I think this is a really good point to draw the distinctions between the differences for where we see trans healthcare.
Let's keep it on our on sort of.
Let's not insult WPATH anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that just doesn't help.
Hold on. There's some accountability that needs to be there, but that's not my point.
I wish you'd.
This is where I will talk to you literally anytime. Alex, please send her my number. Sure.
So let's do this. And first off, this is our final exercise, and it's how we end every podcast. It's called Steelmanning. But first, thank you. This was a difficult conversation. We're going to end on a strong note, but honestly, we need more of this. I think there are hard conversations that need to be had, and I just so appreciate both of you working through this. So I just want to say that. Now, the last thing we do is Steelmanning. So it's when you take your disagreement partner's arguments and you say them in the first person affirmatively in the best faith possible, just to show that you were listening, you understand, and that's it. So would one of you like to go first?
I would love to go first. Okay. I will even add some more good faith context. Marcy, like yourself, I am a public figure, and I understand what it's like to be under attack by all quarters. And I think a important background information for everything you've said today is there has been a massive project to go after you personally in cruel ways that I've watched for a decade now. And I think that's really important. I understand how exhausting it is being in the crosshairs of these people. So that's my good faith Steelman of just the general demeanor here. I think that you, as a clinician, have come into an organization that's like herding cats. And I think you've tried to make the best case you can with all these different groups.
That wasn't taking my side on anything.
Can you do
sure.
do first
Hold
person?
On, well,
like,
let me.
Okay.
Sure. And I think that you are saying that with the methods that you have, the Delphi approach to all of this, you feel like there is
not to all of this. But go ahead.
Oh, you got to let it. All right. You can grade it. You know what, Marcy? You can give it an A, B, C.
Let me start over.
Yeah, start over.
Let's see if I can.
Start over first person.
Marcy thinks that WPATH has done a great job with this.
I didn't say
that the science is sound of it, and that by expanding these cohorts, she thinks that do you think that WPATH is not the enemy? And I think you think that the strongest evidence that the WPATH is based in science is the length of that document. And I think you feel like it is an organization that has a lot of integrity.
All right, Marcy, your turn.
Well, I think there is overwhelming evidence for adult care, but that some of the evidence for gender-affirming care in adolescence would be of lower grade, meaning individuals could get treated who shouldn't be treated, and that pop-up clinics, hormones on demand is not something that should be offered to the general public. But I'm not going to agree with you that WPATH is the enemy.
Okay. That was sort of a Steelman. That was sort of your own position. I feel like it was your own position, but it was a critical position. So it's an inflection. So, all right, this was really excellent. I will give you both an email so that you can continue it, because I do think you are very important voices, and I've learned an incredible amount today.
Just to revisit the original reason, both of us care very deeply about trans people getting the health care that they need. And again, it saved my life. And, Marcy, again, thank you for the surgery you gave me. It radically improved my life. All of us want to get to the right answers, even if we don't agree on the problems.
Well, that means a lot to me.
I mean it.
And yeah, you're a very wise and sharply focused individual, and I hope that we can cross paths again sometime in the future.
You can literally call me anytime.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. Well, I give out I think I gave you my cell phone number. I've given out to every single patient for the last 23 years.
Oh, really? I'll go look at my...
You gotta go look it up.
I'm sure you have it.
I had to do to give my passport.
Take a look. It's probably still on your phone.
Same thing. All right. Thank you both.
Yeah. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Alex. And thanks, Bree.
Thank you.